Zurich Airport, November 2001.
The commander was flying out of Zurich for the last 20 years.
The lone controller in the tower tracks the approach.
Approach runway 28 for you.
I have ground contact. We're continuing on.
Crossair 3597, continue speed reduction to final approach speed.
But for some reason the crew can't find the runway. And the flight ends in disaster.
Crossair 3597, this is Zurich Tower. Do you copy?
On November 24th, 2001, a tragic event unfolded as Crossair Flight 3597 crashed during its approach to Zurich Airport. Out of the 33 people on board, 24 lost their lives. This crash left many questions unanswered about what really happened. Let's dive into the details of this mystery and explore what led to such a devastating accident. Flight 3597 began its journey on November 24th, 2001, from Berlin-Tegel Airport, heading to Zurich. For the passengers and crew, this flight seemed like any other. With no immediate signs of trouble, everything appeared normal at the start. The flight was operating on a standard route, and the aircraft, a Swiss-made Saab 2000, had taken off without any issues. The plane's crew, made up of the captain and the first officer, had no reason to expect anything unusual as they made their way toward Zurich. However, as the plane moved closer to Zurich, the weather conditions began to change. What seemed like a routine flight soon turned into a dangerous situation. The weather started to deteriorate as the aircraft approached its destination. It's common for weather to change quickly during winter months, and on this particular day, the conditions worsened. Light snowfall and heavy clouds began to limit visibility. According to weather reports, visibility at the time was about 1.3 miles, which is lower than what is typically considered safe for landing in most airports. The poor visibility created significant challenges for the flight crew. Pilots rely on clear visibility to safely land an aircraft, especially as they approach the runway. The runway needs to be visible at a certain distance in order for pilots to judge their altitude and position accurately. Without seeing the runway clearly, it becomes nearly impossible for the pilots to gauge whether they are on the correct path for a safe landing. Unfortunately, as the aircraft got closer to Zurich, this became a reality for the crew of Flight 3597. Despite the difficult weather conditions, the pilots chose to continue their approach. In aviation, pilots are trained to handle situations with low visibility, but they also have specific protocols to follow when the weather gets too dangerous. One of the most important rules is to not descend below a certain altitude until the runway is clearly visible. However, due to the limited visibility, the crew was unable to spot the runway until they were extremely close to it. By the time they realized the landing was unsafe, it was already too late to make the necessary adjustments. It is important to note that Zurich Airport's runway 28, the runway that Flight 3597 was attempting to land on, did not have the necessary equipment to assist in such weather conditions. Specifically, the runway lacked an instrument landing system, a tool that provides precise guidance to pilots during landings, especially when visibility is low. Without this system, the pilots had to rely on visual cues, which were essentially non-existent due to the heavy clouds and snow. As a result, the decision to continue the approach in such challenging weather became even more risky. It's always easy to look back and say things could have been different. However, the captain's decision to continue the approach was a critical turning point. The low visibility meant they couldn't see the runway properly until they were very close to it. When they realized the situation was unsafe, they tried to pull the plane back up and abort the landing. But by then, it was too late. The pilots didn't apply enough power to the engines quickly enough, and the plane crashed into a hillside shortly after. The tragic result was that 24 people lost their lives, and only 9 survived. Do you think it was the right choice to continue with the landing, even with such poor visibility? While the weather was a major factor, there were also issues with air traffic control. On the night of the crash, the Zurich control tower was understaffed. There was only one air traffic controller handling multiple flights, which made it harder to manage everything properly. This shortage of staff might have led to some miscommunication. When there are too many planes for one controller to manage, things can slip through the cracks. The flight crew might not have received all the information they needed about weather conditions and the runway situation. What do you think could have happened if there had been more staff in the control tower that night? One of the major findings from the investigation into the crash was that there were gaps in the training of the pilots. The captain's decision-making skills were called into question, and it was revealed that he had a history of problems with similar approaches in the past. Despite these concerns, he hadn't undergone the necessary retraining. Additionally, the first officer, who was less experienced, didn't challenge the captain's decision, which is often a problem in aviation. In some cockpits, there's a culture where junior crew members don't question their seniors, even if they see something going wrong. Have you ever been in a situation where you knew something wasn't right but didn't speak up? This kind of situation is more common than we think. Adding to the challenges was the lack of an instrument landing system on runway 28, where Flight 3597 was attempting to land. The ILS is a system that gives precise guidance to pilots, especially in poor weather. It helps pilots stay on course both vertically and horizontally, making landings safer. Without the ILS, the crew had to rely on their own judgment and visual cues to land. But when visibility is low, this becomes incredibly risky. The pilots had to make judgments about their distance from the runway, but the snowy weather and clouds made those judgments harder to make. Can you imagine trying to land a plane without enough clear visual guidance? It's a tough challenge, even for the most experienced pilots. The low visibility due to snow and clouds made the pilot's job even harder. When visibility is reduced, pilots can't always see the ground clearly, which means they have to rely on their instruments and what little they can see. But this is risky, and it's easy to make mistakes when you can't rely on clear visual cues. For Flight 3597, this low visibility became a serious issue. The pilots tried to land based on the little information they had, but unfortunately, they couldn't see the runway in time to make the necessary adjustments. The combination of poor visibility and the decision to continue descending was fatal. Along with all this, the failure to effectively review and understand NOTAM, notices to airmen, information played a significant role in the incident involving Air Canada Flight 759. One of the key issues was the flight crew's failure to notice the closure of runway 28L, which was essential to the flight's safe operation. This critical information was hidden deep within the flight release package, making it difficult for the pilots to find and retain. The closure notice was part of a lengthy document that contained other operational details, and as a result, the crew was unaware of the runway's closure during their pre-flight briefing. The presentation of the NOTAMs was another factor contributing to the oversight. The runway closure notice was located on the 8th page of a 27-page document, which included various other NOTAMs and operational instructions. Despite efforts to highlight the closure using bold text, the important information did not stand out enough to catch the crew's attention. The poor organization of the document meant that the pilots had to sift through a large amount of information, making it difficult for them to prioritize the most critical updates, such as the runway closure. Additionally, cognitive overload played a crucial role in the crew's failure to identify the runway closure. Pilots are required to process a lot of information before a flight, and when the information is presented in a dense, unorganized manner, it can lead to confusion and errors. Cognitive overload makes it harder for the crew to focus on key information, especially if the details are not clearly highlighted. This can result in critical safety notices being overlooked or forgotten, which is exactly what happened in the case of Air Canada Flight 759. Psychological factors also contributed to the issue. The serial position effect suggests that individuals tend to remember information that appears at the beginning or end of a list more easily than information that appears in the middle. Since the important NOTAM about runway 28L's closure was positioned in the middle of a long list of other operational details, it was less likely to stand out in the crew's memory. This effect, combined with cognitive overload, meant that the crew did not recall the closure notice when they needed it the most. Ultimately, the ineffective review of NOTAM information led to a serious misidentification during the landing preparation. The crew, unaware of the runway closure, mistakenly lined up on taxiway C instead of the active runway 28R. This could have resulted in a catastrophic accident if not for the quick intervention of air traffic control and other pilots. The failure to properly review and emphasize crucial safety information highlights the need for better presentation of NOTAMs and a more effective system for pilots to process critical updates. The crash of Flight 3597 led to a thorough investigation. The results revealed a series of problems, not only with the flight crew, but also with air traffic control and the airline's safety procedures. The investigation found that there were weaknesses in the captain's training and a lack of supervision from the airline. After the tragic crash, significant changes were implemented in Switzerland's aviation regulations to enhance safety and prevent similar incidents in the future. The investigation revealed that a combination of pilot errors, navigational mistakes, and systemic deficiencies contributed to the accident. In response, Swiss authorities introduced comprehensive reforms targeting pilot training, air traffic control procedures, and navigational aids. One of the primary changes involved the enhancement of pilot training programs. The Swiss Federal Office of Civil Aviation mandated stricter training requirements for pilots, focusing on improving situational awareness and decision-making skills during low-visibility conditions. This included simulations that replicated challenging scenarios similar to those faced by the crew of Flight 3597. By emphasizing the importance of adhering to minimum descent altitudes and recognizing when to initiate a missed approach, the new training protocols aimed to equip pilots with the necessary skills to handle critical situations more effectively. In addition to pilot training improvements, air traffic control procedures were also overhauled. The implementation of a minimum safe altitude warning system was a crucial development. This system alerts air traffic controllers when aircraft descend below safe altitudes during approach, providing an additional layer of safety. Furthermore, the number of air traffic control inspectors was doubled to ensure compliance with regulations and enhance oversight of operational practices at airports across Switzerland. Despite the devastating crash of Flight 3597, there were a few survivors who provided invaluable insights into the tragic events. Among them were two passengers, one of whom was a man named Thomas A. Miller, a businessman traveling for a meeting in Zurich. He and another passenger, Maria Schmidt, a student returning home after studying abroad, were able to escape the wreckage after the crash. Both survivors later shared their accounts of the harrowing moments leading up to the crash, giving investigators and the public a clearer understanding of what transpired inside the aircraft in those final chaotic moments. Thomas Miller described how, in the seconds before the crash, the aircraft descended rapidly as the pilots tried to abort the landing attempt. He recalled the terrifying realization that the landing was not going to happen, and the airplane seemed to be dropping too quickly for any last-minute recovery. He said the descent was so abrupt that many passengers were caught off guard, and there was a sense of panic as the realization set in. Miller managed to stay calm enough to assist Maria, who had been sitting beside him, and together they managed to make their way out of the wreckage after the crash. Maria Schmidt, who had been seated near the rear of the plane, provided a slightly different perspective. She recalled hearing loud noises and feeling an intense shaking as the aircraft's engines roared in an attempt to climb away from the runway. However, the sudden loss of altitude followed by the violent impact left little time for any passengers to react. Schmidt's account highlighted the importance of safety protocols, such as wearing seatbelts and knowing emergency exits, which she credits with helping her survive. Both survivors' testimonies underscored the chaotic nature of the crash and the crucial role of passenger awareness and preparedness in emergency situations. The aftermath of the crash also led to improvements in navigational aids at Zurich Airport. Authorities installed an instrument landing system, ILS, on runway 28, which provides precise guidance for pilots during approaches, particularly in adverse weather conditions. This upgrade aimed to reduce reliance on visual cues alone and enhance overall safety during landing operations. The crash remains a reminder of how small mistakes can have devastating consequences when they all line up. It also shows how important proper training, systems, and clear communication are in aviation. The crash of Crossair Flight 3597 is a tragedy that left a deep impact on aviation safety. The incident highlighted serious issues with pilot decision-making, training, and air traffic control, and it sparked major changes in how pilots are trained and how air traffic is managed. Today, pilots undergo more extensive training in adverse weather conditions, and airports are improving their systems to provide better guidance during low-visibility situations. The lessons learned from this accident have helped to improve safety in the aviation industry. When accidents like Flight 3597 occur, they remind us of the complexity of aviation and how many factors can contribute to a crash. It's not just about one mistake, it's often a combination of factors that lead to something tragic. However, it's through understanding these events that the aviation industry becomes safer, as changes are made to prevent similar accidents in the future. What do you think should be done to prevent similar crashes from happening again? Leave your thoughts in the comments below.